Hi everyone, I'm Aria and I'm happy to be back with a new tutorial this week. This one is super easy to make, so it should be a lot of fun. And also, I finally launched my Patreon page, so go check it out. I'm planning to offer more tiers and benefits soon, but this is a good way to support my work and also get access to all the finished project files from the YouTube videos. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so before we get started, I just want to let you all know that I am using Blender 2.9 beta. I did try to create a honey simulation in 2.83, but I had very little success. It turns out you can do something like this if you do it very small. So if this was your domain here, you'd want to scale it to 0.1 and basically do everything relative to this domain size, which isn't super ideal. So instead, I downloaded Blender 2.9 and it seems they fixed a lot of the issues with the diffusion settings. So my suggestion is to download this specific version and follow along. Alright, but again, if you don't have access to 2.9 and you only have 2.83, then again, just scale everything to 0.1 and try to follow along based on this relative size. Okay, so here we go. Let's just delete the camera and the light here, and we can select our default cube, and we're going to hit S3 to scale it by 3. Then we'll hit G, Z, and type in 3 to bring it up to the ground level. Next, let's go up to the right here and let's click the X-ray toggle just so we can see inside of our cube here. Next, we'll hit Shift A to add a new geometry here. Let's click Icosphere, and then we can hit S to scale it, and we can type in 0.25, click, and then we'll hit G, Z to bring it up on the Z axis and hit 5. Next, we'll hit Shift A to add in a new mesh. We'll click cylinder here, and we want to rotate this 90 degrees. So depending on which axis you're facing here, mine is the Y here. So we're going to rotate on the Y axis. So R to rotate, Y, and then type in 90. Now we want to scale it, so we'll hit S, and we're going to hit Shift X to lock it only to the Z and Y axis, and then we're going to type in 0.2. So now we can bring it up. Let's hit G to move it, Z to lock to that axis, and we'll type in 3.5. Okay, so we can add one more mesh. Let's hit Shift A, go to Mesh, and click Cube. Then we're going to scale, so hit S to scale, Z to lock it to the Z axis, and then type in 0.05. Next, we'll bring it up by hitting G, Z, and typing in 2. And then finally, we want to scale it, so let's hit S to scale, then Shift Z to lock it to the X and Y axis, and then we'll type in 2.5. Alright, so now that we got that done, we just want to animate a couple of our meshes here. So let's click on the icosphere here, or you can click over there. Let's right click and shade smooth. Then we'll just go over to the right here to the modifiers tab. Click this here, and we're going to go to subdivision surface. And then we'll set both the render and the viewport to 2. Now, just so we can see a little bit better here, let's just hide our domain. So it's cube here. So we're just going to rename this domain just because we've got more than one cube in our scene. And we can just click this little eye to hide it out of the way. Alright, and then before we animate these, let's just click the cylinder here. We can right click and shade smooth. Let's hit tab to go into edit mode, or you can click up here on the left to go into edit mode that way. And we just want to add a few more loop cuts. This is not absolutely necessary, but it just makes it look a little bit nicer. So let's hold Control and hit R, and you'll see that brings up a yellow guide here. So we can just click, and then we'll just drag this over to the end. Let's do that again, Control R, and just bring this over to the edge here. Now if we just zoom in a little further here, we can hold Alt and just click this edge here to select this entire loop. Then hit I on your keyboard to inset, and we can just drag our mouses in here. Click, and one more time I, and just drag it in. Then let's do the same thing to the back here. So Alt click here to select that loop, and then we can hit I and just drag our mouse inwards. I one more time and drag it inward, and then click. Alright, so now we can hit tab to go back into object mode here. One more time, we'll just go over to the modifiers tab here, click here, and we'll add a subdivision surface and set this to 2. Awesome, so now we're ready to animate these two objects here. So let's go to frame 1, and we can click on our icosphere here. We'll click I to bring up the keyframe menu, and in this case we just need to keyframe our location, so click location here. And if you hit N on the keyboard, you can see now this is turned yellow, which means we've created a keyframe for that specific frame. click the cylinder here, we can hit I. And for a cylinder, all we need to do is key our rotation. So let's click rotation here. And you can see with that, we've added our keyframe. Alright, so drag your mouse just up to the left here until you see a little plus symbol, and we can click, and we're just going to drag out to create a new window here. And just up in the left corner here, we'll just click, and we're going to go to the graph editor. And you can see that because we added keyframes to these objects here, that we've got something to work with. If we clicked on our ground plane, you'll see that there's nothing here because there's no keyframe data. Okay, so let's click our icosphere here, and let's just hit normalize just so everything is easier to see. Let's click this little down arrow here, and in our case, we just want our icosphere to move back and forth on the y-axis. So now we can just hover back over this window here, and we'll hit N to bring up this menu here. Next, let's just click and drag just to give ourselves a little bit more room here. And since we want our icosphere to move back and forth on the y-axis here, let's make sure we click Y location. Let's go over here to modifiers, and we can click here and add a noise modifier. So now if we hit play, you'll see we've got this kind of jittering thing going on here, which is not really what we want. So we can let that play here, and we can just start to change our settings here till it looks a little bit more like what we want here. And just make sure that it doesn't go outside of the domain here, or else it won't work. You can also add noise to the other axis, but for this tutorial this should work. Let's just change the scale a little bit to, I think it was around 20, just so it's a little bit slower. Alright, so that's looking great. Let's just hide our domain again. We can go back to frame 1 here, and let's click on our cylinder. Up to the left here, we can just click this little down arrow, and basically we want to rotate on the Z axis, so let's click this Z rotation here. Click modifiers, and we can go to generator. If we hit play, you'll see that we've got this super fast spinning cylinder, which is not really what we want, so we can make a couple changes here. So I'll be honest, I don't know what a lot of these things do, but I just know that if you lower this value here, you'll get a slower spin. And in our case, we want to go in the other direction, so let's go minus 0.1. Now you can see that we've got this gradual rotation. Awesome, so our animation is looking pretty good, so we can just right click here, click join areas, and then we'll just click over here to close that side window. And now we're ready to start our simulation. So let's just go over to the right here to the physics properties here, and we can click fluid here, and we're going to make this one an effector object. You can probably leave this to 0, but I usually just like to give it 1 or 2 sub steps just to help the simulation work a little bit better. We can click our ground object here, we'll click fluid, and we'll do the same thing, add an effector, and we can set this to 0 or 2. Next, let's click our icosphere here. We're going to go to fluid again. Click here, and we can select flow. Let's change from smoke to liquid. And we'll select inflow, and basically the difference is here. Geometry will just create a one-time volume at the start of the simulation, whereas inflow will continually add liquid to the simulation. And you'll notice with mine, at one point it does stop. So if you want to do that, what you can do is just keyframe this here, basically, and turn it off and on as you see fit. Alright, and then just finally we want to view our domain again, so let's click the little eye up on the right hand here. Now we can click our domain, click fluid. Click on type, and we'll change this to domain. Let's change the domain type to liquid. And for the resolution, you want to go at least as high as 64. For mine, I did 200, but for the tutorial today, I'll just do 100. But if you can, do 128 or 200 if you can. But just keep in mind that that will largely increase your cache times. I think my final cache took around 2 hours, but I also had 350 frames. Also, my time steps were a lot higher, but even if you do 64, you will get pretty good results. You just won't really get those nice little cavities that you see where it's kind of folding. So if you do want to get that, I suggest going up as high as you can, even as high as 256 if that's possible. Next, let's change the time steps to 15 and 12. And again, depending on your system, this will increase the amount of time it takes to cache your simulation. So if you're finding it's taking too long, you can certainly lower this to whatever works for you. But if you go too low, you'll start to get little pieces falling off instead of it all sort of sticking and flowing together. So like I said, try to keep this as high as possible. So we can uncheck all of these here. It's not going to do much, but it will save us a bit of time on simulation. Then let's scroll down here. Let's click diffusion. open this, and this is where if you're using version 2.83, you probably won't have much luck with this, like I said, unless you've scaled your domain way down. The only other option I found is if you are using 2.83, you can set the base to 10 and you can set the exponent to 0 and set the surface tension to something like 5 or so. You will get a decent result, but it's not quite going to turn out the way using 2.9 will. So again, download Blender 2.9 if you want to follow exactly along with what I'm doing here. Okay, so we're going to change our exponent to 1 here, and we're going to click our surface tension and type in 1.8. This is going to be very important to have our honey kind of stack up on top of each other without sort of like flowing away like water would. So feel free to play with that, but I found the settings work pretty good. Alright, and then finally we're going to click mesh here. Let's open this, and you can leave it to 2 or set it to 3 again depending on your system. Basically this will just give it a slightly nicer look. Alright, so that's everything. Now we're ready to bake here, so you can just click here and go to final or all depending on what version you're using. And in my case, I'm only going to do 120 frames just for the sake of time, but feel free to set that to whatever your animation length is. And just the final thing you want to do before you bake is just make sure that this doesn't say something like temp. Just make sure to save your file, and then this should be set up properly here. But if you bake before you save your file, it'll end up in a temporary folder. And then when you save your project, you may lose this. So just save first, and then you can bake your data. Alright, and then once that's done, we'll finish the rest of the scene. Awesome, so now that that's complete, we can just scroll up here. Let's just turn off the liquid here since we don't need that anymore. And then let's just turn off X-ray mode here. And then let's click on our domain here. Make sure it's the domain, not the icosphere. Let's right click and shade smooth. Alright, and then we can hit spacebar or click play to play through our animation. Alright, and that's looking awesome. You'll notice that some of these pieces are disconnecting here, and that's just the resolution. So if you want to get a bit nicer simulation in areas like this, for example, just make sure you set this higher. But once we add our materials, this should look pretty good. So just find a frame that you like here, and then we can just go up to the right here and turn on our render preview. And of course, since we don't have any lighting or HDRI, we're just getting this gray reflection here. So just go into the world properties over here. And instead of having a color, let's click this dot here and we'll go to environment texture. We can click open, and then you just want to find an HDRI that works for you. If you want to use the one that I'm using, you can just go to hdrihaven.com and search for Adams Place Bridge, and I'll also leave the link in the description. And then click open. So now you can see that we've got a basic lighting setup. Okay, so let's click our domain here, and we can go down to the right here to the materials properties and click new. We can change the base color to something a little bit more orange. Let's put the roughness down to 0 or something very low, and let's change the transmission to 1. If you are using Eevee, just make sure to click screen space refractions here as well as in the render settings. And you can also turn on ambient occlusion. Just make sure that you do that for all of your meshes. Alright, but since I use cycles for mine, I'm going to switch over to cycles here. And just make sure if you've got a GPU that you select that as well. Next we can click our cylinder here, go back to the materials properties, click new. Then we'll just scroll down, change the roughness to 0 and the transmission to 1. By the way, just make sure here in your render settings, if you are using cycles here, that you go down to film and click transparent and transparent glass. Finally, we can click the floor here, go back to the materials properties one more time, click new. Let's change the metallic to 1, and we can just bring the roughness down. Feel free to change the base color to something more orange if you like. Awesome, so before we tweak any of our settings here, let's just finish the rest of the scene. So let's go back up here and go back into solid view. Alright, so we'll hit Shift A here and you can click icosphere. And then we'll just hit S to scale and type in 10. Click, then we can zoom out a bit. Let's turn our X-ray mode back on here so we can see. GZ to bring it up just to center it here. Then we can hit tab, or up on the left here, we can click here to go into edit mode. Let's right click and we can hit subdivide, and we can do that one more time. Okay, so hit tab to go back into object mode here, or again click here on the left. And to get that honeycomb effect that I got here, we just need to add on here. It does come with Blender, but I found that I needed to update mine. So if you just go to the link in the description here, you can download, just click the zip here to download it to your computer, and then we can go to Edit, Preferences, and if you click Add-ons here, you can go to Install. Then you just want to find where the zip file is on your computer, click that there, and install add-on. Then once that's complete here, it should show up, or you can just type in tissue and just make sure that both are selected. One of these is just the default, and one of these is the updated version. Alright, then you can X out of that. Let's hit N here to open up our sidebar here. Now you should see an option here for tissue, so let's click that. The only thing we need to do is click Convert to Dual Mesh. Awesome, so now that we've got that, we can just hit N again to remove the menu there. And then we just want to duplicate our object here, so let's hit Shift D and then hit Escape. Then we want to go over to the Modifiers tab here, click this, and click on Wireframe. Make sure that we've got Replace Original selected here, and the reason why we're doing two different ones is just so we can add two different materials. Feel free to change this to something a little bit thinner if you like. And now if we zoom in here, you can see and turn off our X-ray mode, you can see here that we've got this nice honeycomb behind us. You'll notice that if we turn this back on, everything will be dark because no light is getting through our icospheres. So if we go down to our materials properties here, we can click New. Let's change the roughness to 0 and the transmission to 1. Alright. Then we can change the base color if we like to something a little bit more orange. Then we'll click our other icosphere here, click New, and we can set the metallic to 1, and let's change the roughness down to something really low. We'll also change the base color to something yellow or orange. And now let's just click back on our first icosphere here. We can just bring our roughness up a little bit until we start to see something coming through. Things are starting to look good, so let's just go back into our solid shading here. Let's turn our guides back on. And then the final piece of geometry that we want to add is a cylinder to sort of go around our entire thing here. So let's hit Shift A, go to Mesh and click Cylinder. Now you can just hit S to scale it and just drag your mouse out till it's much larger. We can also turn on X-ray mode here just to see what we're doing. Let's hit GZ to bring this up. S to scale, Shift Z to lock it to the X and Y, and we can just drag it out a little bit more. Awesome, so next let's hit Tab to go into Edit mode, or click up here on the left. We can hit 3 on our keyboard or click here to go into Face Select mode. Let's click away, and then let's click this top face here, click Delete, and select Faces. Turn off X-ray mode again up to the right here. We can just go to the side. Click and select all of these faces here, Delete, and Faces. Alright, next let's hold Control and click R and just add a couple of loop cuts here just to support our geometry so that we can subdivide it. Let's hold Alt and click here, Shift Alt and click here, and then we can hit I and drag our mouse inwards, click, hit I one more time and drag into the center. Awesome, so let's hit Tab to go back into object mode here, or select it up here on the left. Right click, Shade Smooth, and let's just go over here to add some subdivisions. And set that to 2. Awesome, so now let's scale it by hitting S, Shift Z, and we can just bring this a bit wider here. And click. So now let's go back into our render preview here. Let's click on our materials here, click New, and we can change this to something more orange. We'll just bring down the roughness a little bit, and that should be good. Alright, so let's click on our first icosphere here now, and we can just change the color a little bit here. Awesome, so that's looking really good. Let's just go into our viewport shading here, and we can just zoom in. So we're inside of our object here, and we want to hit Shift A, and let's add a camera, and then just set your camera view to something that you like. Hold Control, Alt, and hit 0. Then if we go over to the right here to the camera settings, we can change this to 35. Now we can click back into our render preview here. And you'll see that these are looking a little bit darker than we'd like, so let's just start to tweak our materials a bit. So let's click on the icosphere 2. Let's just bring the metallic all the way down. And if we just click this button here, we can remove our overlays just so we can see a little bit better. We can also bring up the transmission here just to help a little bit. Now that's looking a lot better. So just before we tweak our materials here, we just want to add a couple lights. So again, let's just go back into our viewport shading here, and we can just middle mouse click to come out of the camera view here. Alright, and then we can just zoom out here a little bit. Let's just hide both of our icospheres here so we can see what we're doing. Hit Shift A to add a light. Let's click Area. And just hit G and drag our mouse till it's off to the side here. Then let's hit R to rotate, X to lock it to that axis. And you can see that's not rotating properly, so let's just hit Control Z here, and we can just click this here to change this from 3D cursor to individual origins. So if you're ever having an issue with rotating or moving something, if it's not moving kind of off its center axis here, just make sure that this is set to individual origins. Alright, so hit R to rotate, X, and we can just drag our mouse out like that. Come around to the side here, and then we can just hit R and Z to rotate on the Z axis. Now we'll just hit S to scale. Alright, we can hit G to move it and Shift Z to lock it to the X and Y. And just bring it over till it's on a nice angle here. Alright, we can change the power to 100. Now we'll create a second light, so hold Shift, push D, then hit Y to lock to that axis, and we can just drag our second light over here. Click, and then we'll hit R and Z to rotate on the Z axis and just bring it around to face the other way. Alright, so now you can hit 0 on your numpad here to go back into our camera view. And let's go back into our render preview here. And let's just make sure that we turn back on our 2 icospheres as well. Alright, and then we can just click our lights here, and we can change the color on these to something that's more orange. Let's do the same with the other light here. And then it's just a matter of tweaking your materials here, so I'm just gonna fast forward through this part and you can watch what I'm doing. Alright, so everything is looking great. Feel free to tweak your materials and stuff like that to get a different look, but this is pretty much what I did for mine. Alright, so I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. I'm having a lot of fun doing these, so I'm hoping to continue doing that, so please subscribe and like my videos and share. And make sure to check out my Patreon page, and if you're able to support me in what I do, I would really appreciate that. Alright, so I'll see you soon. Bye!